We have Kevin Kilgore today, who's going to tell us all about the Cleveland Open Source Modular Implant Innovators Community, or OSMIC, if I can make an acronym quickly out of that one. Anyway, there's no acronym there, so I just made it up, Kevin, but please take it away.
Can I share my slide?
Okay, you can share it.
All right. So let's see, let's get this up on a full screen here. How about that? Does that work?
Looks great.
Bob is not creative enough to see the acronym COSMIC in front of his face, but anyway, you got to add. You got to add.
I left out the Cleveland. Okay.
So anyway, I'm going to introduce this. I'll try to go through here quickly, but go ahead and interrupt me if you have questions. I'm sorry, I'm terrible at doing more than one thing at once. So if you type in the chat, I probably will never see it unless someone else yells at me, but to point it out. So this is a concept actually that we've been, I would say, kicking around for quite some time, quite a few years actually. But there's some opportunities, it looks like, in the very near future to try to get this concept off the ground. So I was hoping to just at least present it, get people's thoughts, see if there's interest from others in being a part of this. So that's really my goal today, is just to spill out the ideas and see what people think of it. So the idea is to establish and sustain, hopefully, an open source modular network of active implantable devices. And these are for, this would be primarily in the academic world. And so I'm gonna briefly go through what I mean by open source and what I'm talking about as far as the modular network, which most of you I think will be familiar with. And then go into a little bit more detail about some of the key features that would be included in this community. So the target groups here are primarily academic researchers in neuroscience, neuromodulation, neuroprosthetics. Probably, I'm sure everyone on this call would fit into that category. Could also be early stage companies, although as you'll see, there's some pluses and minuses to that. Certainly open source, especially if you talk about implantable things, is a bit of a challenge when you then want to combine that with, with a for-profit company. This would be for in vitro, but in particular in vivo experimentation, acute and chronic animal studies in particular, and early feasibility human studies. So obviously there's a big leap between, doing animal studies in an open source environment. That seems pretty doable. Doing human studies in an open source environment, there's probably a lot of issues, but we'll talk a little bit about what some of those hurdles are. So just a couple then quick things. The modular implant system that I'm talking about is the network neuroprosthesis. I'll talk about that very briefly in a minute. I think most people, who are on this group have at least heard of it, but I thought it's worth at least giving a brief explanation of what the features are of this system. But it's fundamentally a modular implant and works really well for this open source idea. It fits really well. Okay, so I wanted to just show this, which is a notice of intent to publish from the Spark program at NIH. This looks like a funding opportunity that is very well suited for this cosmic idea. And it does say that they were going to put the actual funding opportunity announcement out August 6th. As far as I know, unless something happened in the last half an hour, it still hasn't shown up. So the Spark people must be about a month behind, and I don't know exactly what will happen. But just to pull out a couple things out of this notice is that this opportunity would be to create centers with interoperable modules that can be combined into custom modular profiles. So, which is exactly what the network neuroprosthesis can do. And that the centers will disseminate the open source biotechnology resources broadly. So that's the open source part of it and the community part of it. And those two things are critical. And that's what I'm hoping to bring together in this idea, in this community. They're talking about good-sized awards. Awards, I think that would be enough funding to get this up off the ground and hopefully make something that is sustainable long term. That obviously is the goal. 3 years isn't very much time, but at least there's significant resources there. Which originally they said the due date would be November 15th. Given that they're a month behind, I don't know if that will still be true, but we'll find out whenever they issue the FOA. Okay, so just a couple slides on the network neuroprosthesis. If you already know what this is, you can read some emails for the next 2 slides. But this is a system that we've developed here at CASE starting about 2001, I think, when we first started this. And the idea was to create a modular network of implantable devices with different features, but to basically have a platform technology that you could then mix and match different sensing and stimulating capabilities, maybe other capabilities as well, but that would all be fundamentally based on this network concept. So there's a module that provides the power, but the key piece of this is that there are linked networked modules. They are linked by a cable, a wired network that provides both the power and the communication. And then, of course, you can daisy chain, in theory, as many of these modules together to provide the kinds of function that you want. So this particular example here is shown for hand function and spinal cord injury, but that's not really the point of this particular talk. Is not any specific application. It's really just the broad application of this technology. And another key thing is that it's fully implanted, meaning both the powering and the processing capabilities are all inside the body. And that's an important feature for us and for a lot of applications. The most important feature of the NNP right now, is that we already have an investigational device exemption and early feasibility IDE approved from the FDA, and it's already been in human use. And so that, to me, is a very key feature. That the idea is that this is a technology that you could use, that there's already an existence proof that it can make it all the way through the regulatory process. And that is a significant hurdle that I'll come back to. And then just real quickly, we have, as I mentioned, a power module, we call it, which has the rechargeable batteries. It has the recharging circuitry and also a wireless link for programming. And then the rest of the system is made up of these remote modules, which can have different functions. And right now, the existing remote modules is an electrical stimulator, which has 4 channels. and a biopotential signal recording module, which has 2 channels. But the current system can handle up to 7 modules. So depending on how you want to configure the system, you can have this kind of variety of modules. And then there's also temperature and 3-axis acceleration in each one of the modules. So you start to have a pretty good sensor network throughout the body, and that's something that I think a lot of people would like to take advantage of if they could. So the network neuroprosthesis is set up pretty well for that. And then one last thing about the NNP is that we are continuing to develop the modules. So we already have funding to develop, to some extent, a variety of new features, which I won't go into all of these, but for example, we have an R1 grant to develop a health monitoring sensor package that basically would go in line in these network cables. So there's a lot of advantages there for a pretty capable sensor network. Oh, and then I guess just to reiterate, yes, it's been in humans, so that's a key thing. And also we have worked with other academic partners to develop additional modules, which demonstrates the feasibility that of the customization part, the fact that we can create new modules that have new functions that can still work within the entire network. So that's kind of a key feature as well. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about the NNP. Now I'm going to focus on the open source part and try to explain this concept. So first of all, open source, of course, has lots of different meanings, and I know that some of you who are on this call know a lot about open source. Some maybe not very much. You've just heard of it, but when I talk about open source in this cosmic concept, I'm talking about open source under these 3 general principles. So first of all, it's available for any purpose, including commercialization. It is available for modification. That is, that you could take what's provided, you could modify it, you could then protect it through intellectual property protection if you wanted to. You could sell those modifications. So you have that complete freedom. The only thing you have to do is acknowledge where you got your original source, which in this case would be through the cosmic community. So there are a lot of groups and places and institutions that have developed these open source licenses, primarily for software, but it's certainly gone a lot broader than that. And so if you want to look at the wording of what these licenses look like, the one that I think most likely applies directly to the cosmic idea is this Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. It basically embodies these 3 principles, only with lots of legalese, so to make the lawyers happy. But anyway, it all boils down to this idea that you have as much freedom as possible. You just need to acknowledge where you got your original source. And then this describes what it is that we are proposing to make available in an open source manner. And so by making available, what I mean is, in this particular case, providing documents and software that are freely available on a website. So it does not mean making modules that are free, although one feature that we would like to include is the ability to purchase components through this the cosmic community, as well as get the documentation. But that's kind of a second level to the whole idea. So let me go through this a little bit, just just to describe what these are. So software is pretty obvious. We would make all the software available. This is similar to, you know, I mean, this could be provided on GitHub or something like that. But I will say that the one thing we're not looking to provide here is are the aspects of the network neuroprosthesis that are specific to a certain clinical application. So, for example, our IDE is for hand and trunk function in spinal cord injury. That's the application. But we're not looking to make that available. That is hand function for spinal cord injury. What we're looking to make available is everything that's specific to the technology itself for other uses. But you need some kind of a user interface that people can start with to do their testing. So software is pretty straightforward. Electrical aspects, so circuit layouts, etc. Those would be provided. Again, that's just documentation. So if people want to build their own circuits, or then probably more likely take the circuit layout and modify it so it does their specific feature, they can do that. That's available. And then the mechanicals, which means describing the enclosures, mechanical drawings, different kinds of specifications of things like the leads, the connectors, etc. So again, if someone wanted to, they could take these drawings and create, for example, the NNP style connector, or create the cabling or the enclosures that would match what the rest of the NNP system. So those are, I'll show you very briefly a few examples of these kinds of things that are already out there, even for medical devices. But in red here are the aspects that I think, or maybe I hope, are crazy, or at least pushing the envelope. One is the manufacturing protocols. Certainly all over the internet are videos and descriptions of how people manufacture things. But the manufacture of implantable medical devices, there's certainly aspects of that are, let's just say, trade secrets, or the secret sauce that a company might have. Some of those things we own by virtue of having paid for the manufacture of the NNP over the years. Some of the things we can do ourselves, and those certainly we own. Some of these may be difficult to get. So those that are manufacturing procedures that really are things that the companies hold tightly, we may not be able to make those open source. But because we know how to put the entire thing together, we can at least put out there as available to everyone how it is possible to put these together, the concepts that are needed to put these together. And then the last thing is the regulatory aspects. So this gets into what would be needed for making this applicable to humans. And I guess the key thing here is that I'm proposing we would make our entire IDE available freely. So it'll be published and available, and including also our communications with the FDA leading up to the approval of our early feasibility study, and then the communications we've had since the early feasibility study was approved, and we had supplements that related to the technology. Just one quick caveat to that is, again, I'm not including the study design. So the aspects of the IDE that are related to our study for spinal cord injury, hand and trunk function, outcome measures, things like that, would not be part of this. So this is only the aspects that relate to the device itself, the test protocols, the device descriptions, all of those things. Okay, so that's what the website would contain. All of these things would be available, documents available freely. Let me give a few examples here just to give you some context as to the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. So of course, open source, generally people are thinking of software, Linux being the most common example. Where would we be without Linux? But what I would like to do is just show you something more in the hardware and medical direction. So this is just one example. Sparkfun is a company that probably many of you have gotten stuff from. It's pretty good for educators, but they're an open source company, if you will. And so what they provide for each of their products are the schematics, all the board dimensions, data sheets, etc., all the software that would go with it. And so you could take all of this information. It's sufficient that you could create and duplicate this board yourself if you wanted to. But also for $40, you could just buy it, which I'm guessing most people would do that. The only reason people might want to have all of this information is if they want to create their own unique flavor of this particular board. So this allows them to start with something that they know is already working, and then they can modify it if they want to add more sensors, whatever it might be. So that's one example of how this might work. So I would love to be able to have in the Cosmic website the ability, for example, to purchase the NNP enclosures or NNP circuits, for example, that people could then either use, or they could take this information and create their own modified circuit. But getting more into the medical devices, there's a couple of groups like this, like the Open BCI. So again, what is available is of course a lot of software for analysis and operation, but also the circuitry and the mechanical aspects. So things, for example, how to print these beautiful headband things. And I think maybe even how to create their dry electrodes, but also you can purchase these things from their website at the same time. So again, you can build it yourself if you want, you can buy it. Those are the options that we have available. This I think is more interesting, more relevant to an open source active implantable device, which is the open source magnetic resonance imaging community. This I think is kind of crazy, but it's pretty cool if you think about it. So their point here is that there are a lot of places in the world where where a multi-million-dollar MRI machine is just out of reach and probably always will be out of reach. And yet people in those communities could benefit from the medical imaging that you get from MRI. And so the idea is to try to create through an open source community an MRI machine that would be essentially could be built and put together by individuals. Now they don't actually have the complete machine yet, but they do have a very active community. Actually, people at CASE are involved in this community. And so if you look, it's pretty interesting if you look at their website. There's a lot of different things. So these were just the most recent ones that I pulled up, but you know, software for analysis, but also here's the potential magnet array for an MRI machine. So the idea would be ultimately they would assemble these different components together into one complete working functioning machine that could be duplicated. The one thing that is disappointing here is, although they mentioned the regulatory issues, which, you know, there have to be significant regulatory issues when you're talking about MRI. This is obviously something that, you know, could be dangerous. They don't go into a lot of details of how they intend to address that. I think that they are thinking that the places where this machine would be applied would have, you know, lesser regulatory requirements than we might find in the US. But anyway, it's actually serves as a pretty good example. Okay, so I want to go through the next slides quickly just so people have time for questions. But this is just a few slides about the feature and the combination of the network neuroprosthesis and the open source and what it gives you. One thing I would just say is that the modular design for this particular kind of a concept is better than a universal design, meaning that if you tried to create a single device that does everything, it fundamentally is just not possible. And so the modular approach is really required for something like this. This still doesn't guarantee that it'll work for everything that someone thinks up, but it certainly has a lot more freedom for innovation and new modules, for example, new remote modules that do other features, drug delivery or lasers, things like that. Okay, I'm going to skip over the next slides and just go through a series of examples here, but just the idea that the NNP and open source could reduce the hurdles of getting to human study, reduce the cost and delays associated with technology transitions, which I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm just going to use this graphic here. I know that research never progresses in a nice linear fashion as I imagine here from left to right, but just humor me for a minute, just to think through what happens as an idea progresses from bench and acute animal testing all the way through chronic animal testing, through human study with external devices where no IDE is necessary, ultimately to, let's say it's ultimately ends up with a human study using an implanted device. So there's a lot of hurdles here that you have to cross, and some of them have to do with the technology development that you have to do at each stage. And so if we just start over on the left, the first thing is with bench and acute animal studies, you assemble technology, and in general, you're doing this as easily as simply as possible because you don't know exactly what you need, but you're using a lot of bench-based technology at this stage. Then if you need to start testing things more long-term, in other words, you need to test your concept in awake animals. Now you pretty much have to set aside all your benchtop devices and you start over with the technology development, because now you've got to create something that can work chronically in animals. And you end up spending a lot of time doing things like trying to make head connectors work, or figure out how to do percutaneous connections through the skin, or how to make backpacks that fit onto sheep, things that you never really intended to become an expert in, you suddenly have to become an expert in. And so the idea is, if you could start with the NNP that's already implantable, you wouldn't have to make this transition from bench components to a whole new technology for chronic animal study. And of course, in these studies, you can't really afford technology failures. You really want something that is tried and true, but things that are tried and true probably don't do aren't capable of the features that you want in your study. Also, data logging and some other features often get jettisoned at this stage because it's just too difficult. So it would be nice to have those baked in. And then you get to wanting to move to human use. Again, you kind of have to set aside the technology you've been using and start with something that could be used daily by humans. So here, although you don't have an IDE at this stage, you still have the challenge of the IRB approval. You want to make sure that it doesn't require an IDE so you can do this testing. But you need technology that has this durability and wearability, and these lessons are learned painfully because people take stuff home and then they break it, and you have to learn why that happens and how to fix it. it'd be easier if you could start with a technology that already had a track record here. And then, of course, you pretty much have to start over if you're going to go to human implant. There's a lot of aspects of developing human implants that really require you to start over with your design and testing and software. And so this is a huge hurdle to try to get to early feasibility human study. And then again, once you get to that stage, you obviously really can't afford to have failures of your devices. It's very difficult to overcome that. And so it would be really nice to have a technology that already had some track record. So that's where the NNP comes in, and this open source idea is, why not use the exact same technology from beginning to end, at least in cases where you can. So that would mean starting with the NNP circuitry at the beginning through chronic animal studies, external human studies, and then ultimately ending in implant studies with humans. So that means that the software and the support tools you develop at the bench testing stage and chronic animal stage are still relevant through the entire process. The technology has a track record of durability, which is important. It has a track record of chronic function and a track record of regulatory clearance, which is pretty important. At least you know when you start that there's a reasonable chance that the technology you're using could actually make it through the FDA's regulatory process. At least you know it happened once. So, hopefully it could happen again. There's no guarantee there. All right, let me finish with a couple more slides, and then I'll just open it up. So, the community itself would be a standard open source community. I'm not going to go into these, but, interactive groups, you want to have a way for people to also contribute back to the community. So modifications that they may have made, you would like to be able to be back into the community so others could take advantage of that. And understanding what motivates people to do this and to be a part of the community is pretty important in establishing this whole process. The types of users, there will be various types of users. Obviously, some will just get documents and leave. If it were up to me, I would just go in here, get the IDE and leave because that by itself will be pretty valuable. The section that involves human implants might need to be a more select community just because of the regulatory requirements. That remains to be seen. We'll see what is necessary there. And then in anticipation of the Spark program, which is called HORNET, I forget what it stands for, Human Open something. Anyway, it's a Spark program that hopefully will come out soon. The grant would then be used to establish the general concept, obviously the licensing and website and so on. A big effort will be preparing documents for dissemination. Certainly we have all of these documents, but they were never created for public consumption. And so there's quite a bit of work in making them usable in an open source environment. And then also there would be some technical development that would be part of this proposal. And it's kind of like going backwards in time. So we already have an NNP that is human use quality, but really that's way overkill for use in chronic animals and use as an external aversion for humans. And so we would be creating I'll just call it a cheap, maybe that's not the right word, but an inexpensive version for chronic animal studies. So for example, a lot of the cost of the NNP system for human use is due to the enclosures, the packaging, the titanium enclosure, the headers, the connectors. And in chronic animal studies, you don't need something that lasts for decades like you do in humans. You just need something that's going to last for a few months, probably at most, maybe a year. And so that's what we would be doing. That would be part of this proposal, would be developing those versions, say components that are that are, you know, just potted in epoxy or something like that, that may not last for decades, but certainly could last for a few months in a chronic animal situation. And then this is the last thing. You know, the initial focus, of course, is on bench and chronic studies because that's easier. You don't have the regulatory issues at all there. And then you would move on to external human use and hopefully be able to do open source human implants. All right, that remains to be seen. So that's it. If you are interested in this idea and want to be part of it, just send me an email. I'd be interested in that. I don't know when the proposal will start being assembled. That depends on the Spark program, but I just wanted to put this out there as an idea. So now I am open for questions or comments.
Any questions for Kevin?
Kevin, this is Steve Lewis.
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
So is this relevant to chronic rat work?
Okay, so that's a good question, which I forgot to put in here. So I think that it is entirely feasible to create a version of the network neuroprosthesis that will work in rats, that could be implanted in rats. I don't know that it's possible to do this in mice. I know that, you know, the neuroscience world would love it if we could do it in mice. I just don't know that that's feasible, but based on the size of certainly our remote modules, those could be made to fit in rats. I don't think it would be too difficult to do that. So my intention is to, for the acute and chronic systems, that they would be sized such that you could put the entire system into a rat and have a functioning network neuroprosthesis.
That's really important, Kevin, because as you're well aware, that's an enormous hole in the literature. True chronic studies, stimulation studies in rats. They can be successful, but like the one we just published recently, you have to do like 60 rats to get like 10 that actually make it all the way through. So any system that can improve upon that would be truly remarkable.
Yeah, I feel I agree with you, Steve. I think, you know, it really is. I guess it's a high priority to me to make this usable in rats and also to make it, you know, cost effective for chronic animal studies. And I think we can do both because the circuitry itself is pretty cheap to duplicate. And if we can come up with a really inexpensive, simple way to encapsulate these for short-term studies, I think we could make this such that it would be a system that, you know, people doing rat studies could reasonably use this, and it wouldn't, you know, it wouldn't kill their grants by $100,000 investment in technology.
Well, obviously, I'm in all the way, Kevin. Anything I can do to help, and I know my colleague E.C. Shea and I would you know, would love to help in any way possible.
All right, good. I got you signed up. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, man.
So Kevin,
I have a question, Kevin.
go ahead, Dominic.
Yes.
So I know you said you didn't want to talk too much about the network prosthesis, but could you give us an update on the human studies? I really feel like I don't know enough of that right now.
Yeah, actually, that might be a whole separate talk, but I can tell you we have the system in 5 people so far. I think the longest now is approaching, is it 4 years? I think it's 4 years. So the technology, and this is for, I should have stepped back a bit because not everyone would know this. So the initial implementation of the network neuroprosthesis was in spinal cord injury for trunk and hand function. And so the individuals who've received the system so far have 7 modules, 6 in general, 6 stimulator modules and 1 EMG recording module. And those are placed in one arm, in the torso and trunk, upper legs, for reach and for trunk function, seated posture, and in some cases for standing. And so that has been successful. What we found is that the network communication, one of the issues is that, at least for some people, the network communication seems to degrade after a year or two. And so it looks like we've figured out what that issue is. It looks like it happens in the connectors themselves. And so we're doing an update to the network cable. So we haven't done an implant in a little while, a couple years, I think. And so we're anticipating starting those up in probably January timeframe, something like that.
Yeah, I thought the problem might be you have a capacitive power connection, right? If I remember.
Yes.
And that's not the problem. That's pretty novel, I think, but for this.
That's not the problem, but I can say we probably made our lives harder by making a 2-conductor serial communication that has both power and communication on the same 2 conductors, instead of splitting those up. And so I think ultimately, and I would say that this would likely be part of a cosmic grant, is splitting those up so there are separate lines for power and communication. It just makes it easier conceptually. And we did it because we thought, well, it's so much easier from the surgical installation standpoint, but actually in retrospect, I don't think it makes that much difference whether you run 1 cable or 2 between the modules. And so I think going forward, that's one of the features that I would say is going to be upgraded for the system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask you another one?
Yes, you are allowed, Dominique, especially since you keep interrupting Bob Curtis, which is great.
I can keep doing this. I remember someone saying that the larger the surface area of an implant, the larger the chance of getting an infection. Now, this network is pretty large surface areas wise. So have you noticed anything in that respect?
We wondered about that. I mean, we have had one infection, so, but there's not enough of a sample to make any statement about that. Certainly, it's a lot of surface area by the time you add it up, at least talking about a hand and trunk system like what we've been implanting. I tried to find, when we were working on this initially, I tried to find any information about that really, a real study. And if you know of any, or if anybody knows of any studies, I'd be pretty interested in that. But I couldn't find any real information that said, infection rate is related to surface area.
I think I heard it from Tom, probably.
Well,
right,
wait a minute. Okay, now that you called me out, I'd like to comment here. I wasn't sure what I was going to get into when I tuned in here. This has been an incredibly nice experience for me to watch what you're putting together, Kevin. And when I'm sitting here thinking about this, I'm thinking about 2 men, and probably those men's names are totally forgotten by probably everyone on this meeting, Jim Reswick and Lois Vodovnik. I just wish that these men were still alive to see where their idea has come. They would be so pleased to see what you've done with this, Kevin, to see where this is all led. And everything I've seen here today, it's easy, at least for me, to trace it back to their idea back in the mid 60s. So I don't know, for me, it's just been a terrific experience to sit here and listen to you and see this idea blossom. Maybe there's something this old man can do to help you, but I do
Thanks,
like
Tom.
this idea.
Yeah.
I do like this idea. This is really spectacular.
You know, you do bring up thank you, I appreciate that. You do bring up an important point, which is, I remember in the early days of I think of the NNP design, I look back at some old Vinovnik paper from, I don't know, must have been in the 70s. And he'd already sketched out the basic concept in some paper somewhere. It's like, there's nothing new that we've come up with. It's all back there somewhere, hidden in some of those early papers. But anyway, hopefully we can bring this actually out and really make it a truly open source technology that's available.
I think that the fact that, or the idea that other people have had ideas before takes nothing away from what you've done here. Absolutely nothing. I think it's dreams that people have had for a long time, how to do this. And the, you know, what you have brought through here with the NNP is an incredible device that can be used. But the way you're making this an open source thing, I can't imagine Reswick and Vinovnik being any more pleased. I wish they were alive to see this.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
I'm going to go quicker this time, Kevin. Ha ha. I have a couple of words. One is liability, and one is ownership. So they're kind of related. So who owns the stuff that's being sort of, quote, given away?
Oh, who cares?
I know.
Yes. No, that's a good point. And I didn't get into any of those things, but so there are well, any NNP patents that exist are owned by the university. They haven't been licensed to anyone else. So they are in the university's hands. So I've had a series of discussions with the Tech Transfer Office and with the with Mitch Drum, and the next step is going to talk to legal at Case and work through the details. So there, you know, you can imagine, I'm sure you appreciate, there are a lot of details from the legal side, liability side, that have to be worked out. One part of this is how much the university wants to be, you know, part of the attribution license, for example. So, you know, does the university want to have their name all over it, or do they want to say, you know, we don't want our name anywhere near this thing, or somewhere in between? So those final decisions, you know, are yet to be determined. I think that actually they probably won't be settled at the time a grant would be due, but I don't think that's too bad. I think as long as we have the support of the university and at least a pathway to make some final decisions on that, I think that's what we really need. The other aspect, which is ownership. So, you know, it's in addition to the university, you would worry about other licenses, and also the fact that, you know, the network neuroprosthesis was developed over many years and developed at a variety of companies, you know, who participated in the manufacture. Fortunately for all of those things, they were all done under work for hire contracts. And so the university retained all of the intellectual property related to the NNP, you know, even though some aspects were in some ways designed at some of these industrial partners. So I think we are free. Obviously, a legal determination will have to be made from that standpoint, but I don't think we have to worry about any other company making a claim. We just have to get the university to make a decision as to, to what degree do they want to be involved and what kind of legal language is necessary, that's part of the open source license.
So one last thing. I can't figure out how you're going to spend $5 million a year. Is this making some of these modifications and then selling them for $39.95, or I can't quite figure out how you're going to spend the money.
Well, I didn't say that the budget that I was going to ask for that amount. I haven't figured that part out yet, but I would expect that, first of all, just assembling the documentation and so on will be a full-time job, but it's not $5 million, or even setting up the website. But one aspect of the technology is creating these less expensive modules and testing them so that people can have confidence to use them in chronic animals and for external use for humans. What the budget is, I have no idea yet. That remains to be seen.
I can suggest some way to spend it.
Yes.
I mean, really,
You already had your turn, Duran.
No. This is to go back to Steve's idea. We do need something in rodents, and maybe some of the ways you could use this technology is to say, hey, we're going to build a mini network for rodents to test some of these ideas, and then they can be if they work, they can be transferred in humans.
Yes, I think I agree with you. I think that's a really important part of this, and it's not simple. It's not. I don't believe it's impossible at all, but that is, I feel like, is probably going to be the major budgetary effort of this proposal.
And Kevin, if I might just jump in there, the animal models we might want to be testing, like spontaneously hypertensive rats or Zucker rats, they get up to $1,000 each to study. So the budget needs to be quite that adds up really quickly.
Yeah.
So I would suggest we'd spend $5 million in the first year, probably, between Dominic and myself.
Yes, I have no doubt that there are ways to figure that out. Yes, well, if I include Bob's salary on the grant, then there's not going to be any problem spending.
Oh, brother.
Hi, Kevin. This is Musa. Can I ask a question?
Yes, Musa, go ahead.
I'm sorry I joined this forum late, so maybe you have actually answered the question. So if you have, just say so, and then I will go back and take a look at the recorded video. My main question is, I have actually experienced a system, first of all, in a commercial version of it, and then I experienced the same thing in an open source version of it. And I could see a very big issue related to the problem of support in the case of the open source system. It's one of the major things that actually, even though if it is open source, it will be left to the community to keep helping each other, but that could be very problematic in terms of rapid development. So what have you talked about this issue of support in the open source system?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, and I actually took those slides out of the talk, so you didn't miss anything, Musa. But the technical support, I feel like a real live technical support is going to be absolutely necessary. So, although certainly you hope that within the open source community there is the self-support, the community support that helps. But we're absolutely going to have to be providing, real live technical support to people, at least in the early stages, without a doubt. That technical support will not be provided for free. So, you know, and that's a typical open source model that although you make all of the technology available, if you need to talk to someone about it to make it all work, that is done on, you know, some kind of fee for service basis. One of the things that I think, you know, the funding, potential funding through a grant mechanism like this Hornet grant does for us is it gives us time to get established with how we might do the customer support, because you know, it could become overwhelming. It depends on obviously how big the community is and things like that. But the grant actually gives us the opportunity to bring people on board, get people trained up, get people who are, you know, able to be full-time customer service representatives, if you will, if that's necessary. Obviously, that remains to be seen, but primarily that part of it would be a fee-for-service a type of delivery. So I don't know that that can be a moneymaker. I doubt it. But the point is, that's not something that you would be expecting to provide for free because it's not really sustainable.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Kevin?
Just one quick one, if I could. Kevin, have you spoken to any of the hierarchy at Spark about this, like Gene Civilico or anyone?
So I've tried to bug them a few times, but they haven't gotten back to me. So I don't know what that means.
So I may suggest Mike Wolfson gets back to you very quickly, but yeah.
Yes, you're right. Michael Wolfson is yes, he's much better at getting back to you quickly. I didn't think about bugging him about this. I'll do that because he would be a good source.
Yeah, Mike Wolfson and Nick Langals. Nick is incredible, and he'll give his full support to this. And they're all buddies, you know, they all know each other. They all came from the same sort of program. So I think the earlier you start talking to these people like Nick and Wolfson in particular, the better.
Yes. Also on the Hornet grant, Brooks Gross is one of the program people who's identified on that particular grant. And he's also a program officer in some of our other grants too. So
yeah, very good.
Okay. Last call. Okay, Kevin, thank you very much for presenting today. See, that's what you're supposed to do, present before you write the proposal.
yeah, it's a challenge sometimes, but anyway, yes. All right, thanks everybody.
Yep, thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Feel free to email me if you have any comments.
All right. Thanks, Kevin.